Oh, when I have something factually wrong, yes. I mean, I even printed a correction, factual correction last year for the first time. But that's really not a big problem.
For the first time?
Yes.
The world has never been a level playing field.
I think this is very important to, not all of us are book learners.
Well, I could say that I also have a high opinion of myself, and I'm not very good at dancing, but I really don't think that ballet schools should be adjusted to take for people like me.
And most people, when they have a choice between hating others and hating themselves, they hate others.
What black people chose to do. It's what you choose to put in the mouths of black people. It is what you choose to project. It is not what any black people have ever said anywhere that you can put your finger on.
It's what you choose to put into the mouth of the pollsters, as far as I can see.
I
Look at the leadership of the black community.
Like most people, I have never seen a pollster.
If you look at the leadership of the black...
It's one of those things that someone says that he objects to in someone else, but we can never find the someone else who's supposed to have said it.
I grew up in an era when people, and particularly blacks, were a lot poorer than today, faced a lot more discrimination than today, and in which the teenage pregnancy rate was a lot lower than today. I don't believe there is a predestined amount of teenage pregnancy, a predestined amount of husband desertion.
The Germans were not more racist than other people. All the evidence that I was able to find was that in general they tended to be less racist, not only towards Jews, but towards blacks in the United States, towards the American Indians, and towards the Aborigines in Australia. And so that the really chilling conclusion I draw from that is, if what happened in Germany could happen among Germans, it could happen anywhere, and none of us should feel safe. The Democrats get something like 80 to 90% of the black vote. If that ever falls down to 60 or 70%, they're in deep trouble because they've alienated so many other people that they have a hard time winning elections at all. And so therefore they must try to keep blacks paranoid.
What if the teachers of that era had been imbued with the present day conception of fairness? Where would my schoolmate and I be today? On welfare, in prison, perhaps in a halfway house if we were lucky. And would that not have been an injustice? To take individuals capable of independent, self-supporting, and being self-directed women and men with pride in their own achievements and turn them into dependents, clients, supplicants, mascots.
The number of white people enslaved by pirates in North Africa was greater than the number of Africans brought to the United States.
Now, what I call cosmic justice has been called by some people social justice. But I think they're unduly modest because they're trying to correct not only the inequities that they see in society, they're trying to correct the oversights of God or the defects of the cosmos.
What it means to me is that, among other things, that there is one of many examples of groups that are wholly disproportionately represented in particular areas. And it shows what a farce it is that intellectuals and even the courts think it is something remarkable when there's some group is X% of the population, but Y% of the people in this profession or that institution. That's true all around the world. I hear people say, I don't understand why this company CEO makes all this money. The government should do something about it. Or they say, the pharmaceutical companies spend more on advertising than on research, and the government should stop that. And I remember writing back to one of these guys and saying, what facts do you have? What expertise do you have? What anything do you have that enables you to say how much advertising and how much research somebody else should be doing in a field that you have no knowledge of? Years ago, one official of one of the Jewish organizations in New York asked me, what can Jews themselves do in order to minimize the hostility they face? I gave him a one-word answer: fail. Because as long as you succeed, you're going to be hated.
And Johnson pointed out that Lenin, although he spoke of himself as a representative of the proletariat, had in fact never set foot in a working class neighborhood in any of the cities he'd ever been in, inside or outside of Russia. He had never talked with the workers and had no idea what they believed about anything. I might add that he also, after becoming the ruler of Russia, never set foot in Soviet Central Asia, which is an area larger than all of Western Europe. and in which all these doctrinaire schemes from Moscow were imposed for nearly 3/4 of a century with devastating results. What he was devoted to was the vision, not flesh and blood people. Flesh and blood people were a complication on the road to realizing the vision. And as it turned out, if he had to kill a few million of those, that was just so much too bad. And of course, we've seen Hitler, Mao, and others with the same approach.
It's incredible the way you start the story in the middle, as if there's a predestined amount of poverty, a predestined amount of unemployment, and that the welfare system is not itself in any way responsible for
A research scientist is not necessarily an intellectual.
That's right.
An engineer isn't necessarily an intellectual.
That's right. Because the engineer is judged by the end product, which is not simply ideas. If he builds a building that collapses, it doesn't matter how brilliant his idea was, he's ruined. Conversely, if an intellectual who's brilliant has an idea for rearranging society, and that ends in disaster, he pays no price at all.
It would have been an irresponsible self-indulgence for them to have pretended to make things fair. If there's anything worse than unfairness, it is make-believe fairness.
Yes, you can renounce war. That does not stop your neighbor from building up the biggest army in the world and coming in and killing you.
These differences don't matter, which they don't. A ton of evidence suggests the amount of money really doesn't make much difference. In Washington, D.C., they have some of the highest expenditures per pupil and some of the lowest scores in the country. In fact, a few years ago, I saw some data on the different states. Of the 5 top states at that time, and it may still be true, in test scores, all were below the national average in expenditure per pupil.
That gives them a great deal of freedom because ideas are so malleable, words are so malleable. Reality is not malleable. And so they can believe in all sorts of things which have no realistic possibility and which have failed time and again in history. But because they know how to rephrase it and repackage it, they can just keep right on going.
Well, that's the question the economists always ask. Compared to what? I mean, there's a story that the economist ran into a friend in the street, and his friend said, "How are you? How's your wife?" And he said, "Compared to what?"
Eric Hoffer is saying intellectuals cannot operate at room temperature. You said there always has to be a crisis, some terrible reason why their superior wisdom and virtue must be imposed on the unthinking masses.
Yes. You can go back over the last 100 years. You can go back to eugenics in the early part of the 20th century. You can go back to Keynesian economics. You can come forward to the environmental movement. There always is something which requires them to substitute their wisdom and virtue for our lack of understanding. But in the poorest and worst of the ghetto areas, there are lots of people who have not. And these kinds of, it's a culture which didn't do whites any good. And it's certainly not doing blacks any good today. And the tragedy is that people regard this culture as somehow the authentic black culture, and therefore you're not to interfere with it. It's to be allowed to, and so they're cheering people on.
What the welfare system and other kinds of governmental programs are doing is paying people to fail. Insofar as they fail, they receive the money. Insofar as they succeed, even to a moderate extent, the money is taken away. This is even extended into the school systems, where they will give money to schools with low scores. Insofar as the school improves its education, the money is taken away, so that you are subsidizing people to fail in their own private lives and become more dependent upon the handouts.
Thank you for having me.